What's up guys, welcome back. So this is our second video of the Q&A series. I received a lot of messages that the Q&A series will be very helpful to understand the topic. You love it and I love it doing it, so let's start. So the today's Q&A will be on the meaning and scope of supply. So the first question of the Q&A is, what is the taxable event under GST? So the taxable event under GST is the supply of goods or services or both made for consideration in the course or furtherance of business. So the taxable event under GST is the supply of goods or services, and it should be made for consideration, and the supply of goods or services is in the course or furtherance of business. So make the point into the mind that the taxable event is the supply. Earlier, the taxable event under excise was the manufacture, the taxable event under VAT was a sale, and the taxable event under the service tax was the provision of service. But now all the tax has been subsumed into the GST, so now the taxable event is a supply. The next question is very important. The question is, what is the scope of supply under the GST law? So the scope of supply is very wide under the GST. Section 7 gives the definition or the meaning of supply. It says that the supply includes all form of supply of goods or services like sale, transfer, barter, exchange, licensing, leasing, rental or disposal made for the consideration and in the course of businesses. So as we can see that the supply include sale, transfer of goods or services, barter, like we transfer the goods or we exchange the goods with another goods, and similarly the exchange, licensing, like licensing of the telecommunication spectrum or anything, rental of house property, leasing of land or other things, or the disposal like selling of the discarded goods. So all the activity like sale, transfer, barter, exchange, license, leasing, rental or disposal of goods or services will be supply under GST. But those activities should be made for the consideration and it should be in the course or furtherance of businesses. So the activity should be for the consideration and it is for the in the course of businesses. So the two thing is very important for making any activity to fall under the definition of supply. That is, it should be the activity should be for the consideration and the activity should be in the course or furtherance of businesses. And the supply also include the imports of services. Section 7 especially include the import of services into the definition of supply. There are 3 schedules which is given under CGST Act. Schedule 1 talks about the activity which is supply even if it is made without the consideration. So suppose the activity which is fall under the schedule 1 of CGST Act is made without consideration, then also the activity will be treated as supply and you have to pay the GST as per the rule or act. Second schedule talks about the deemed supply of goods or services. So suppose the supply of goods or services don't fall under the category of the supply means. So if the activities fall under the schedule 2 of the CGST Act, then you have to pay the tax under the GST, because the law itself says or the law deems that that activity will be treated as supply of goods or services. And the third schedule is about the is exclusively put out the activity from the levy of the GST. So it says that whether or not that activity is supply, then we especially exclude that activity from the meaning of supply of goods or services. So there are 3 also schedules attached with CGST Act that also cover the scope of supply. The next question is very interesting and also very important, and the question is, what are the necessary elements that constitute a supply under GST? So in order to constitute a supply under GST, the following elements should be contained in the transaction before we can say that the activity is supply under GST. So the first element is that the activity involves supply of goods or services. So the activity should be a supply of goods or services under GST, and we have known about the meaning of supply under GST. Supply includes sale, transfer, barter, exchange, lease, licensing or disposal. So if any activity involves those like sale, transfer, barter, etc., then it will be treated as supply of goods or services. So the first element is that the activity involves supply, and the second one is that supply is for the consideration. So before we tax any activity into the GST, it should be for the consideration. So if you want to say that whether the activity is supply under GST, it should be for the consideration. But there is an exception to this. Schedule 1 lists out those activities which will be treated as a supply of goods or services even if it is made without consideration. So suppose a activity is without consideration, then also that activity can be a supply of goods or services if it is listed out in Schedule 1. So we have to take a look at the Schedule 1 before we can say that the activity is supply or not. So in the general term, if an activity doesn't involve the consideration, it will not be supply, but we have to take a look also Schedule 1 before we can say that whether that activity is supply under GST or not. Third one is that supply is made in the course of businesses. So the supply should be in the course of business. There should be some business involved in that activity. So those persons who are using or supplying the goods or services for the personal use should not be at supply of goods or services. And the charitable institution which help out the needed one for betterment of the society is also not a supply, because it doesn't involve the business. So any activity which doesn't involve the business, like for the personal use or the activity of the charitable institution, will not be a supply of goods or services under GST. And the supply is made in the taxable territory. So the supply should be in the taxable territory. Taxable territory is like the India. So the supply should be within the India before we can say that the supply is a supply under goods and services. But how we can determine the taxable territory? And there are also a lot of practical aspects relating to the taxable territory. I have covered in detail that how to determine the taxable territory in my separate video, and under the topic called place of supply of goods and services in case of export or import of goods or services. Go check out the video if you want to know more about it. And the next activity or the next element before we can say that the activity is supply under GST is the supply is a taxable supply. So the supply should be taxable under GST to constitute a supply, or before we can charge the GST on it. So it should be taxable supply. And the last one is supply is made by a taxable person. So the supply should be made by a taxable person before we can say that it is under the scope of supply. But what exactly is the definition of taxable person? Section 2 subsection 107 defines the meaning of taxable person. It says that the taxable person is a person who is registered under the GST or is required to be registered under GST. So a person who is registered under GST or required to be registered under GST will be treated as a taxable supply, and the supply made by those person who is required to be registered or liable to be registered under GST will be treated as a supply of goods or services. But if you want to know more about the taxable person, then check out my other videos. And the next question is related to the previous question. It says, can a transaction in which any one or more of the criteria which we have discussed in the previous question is not fulfilled, then whether it can still be considered as supply under GST? So the question is, the criteria which we have discussed in the previous answer or the previous question is not followed, and whether a transaction can be supply under GST? So the answer is yes. There are two situations in which the criteria which we have discussed in the previous answer is not followed, then also that will be treated as supply under GST. So the first situation is where the importation of service for a consideration. So if there is the import of service for consideration, whether or not it is for the course of or furtherance of businesses will be treated as a supply of services under GST. So if we import the services for a consideration, then we don't need to check out that whether it is in the course or furtherance of businesses. So if we import any services, for a consideration, then we don't have to look at the condition that whether it is in the course of or furtherance of businesses. So it is defined, it is contained in section 7 subsection 1 clause B. So section 7 clause 1 and clause B of the CGST Act talks about the importation of services. If it is made for the consideration, then we don't have to look at the other aspect like whether it is in the course of businesses. So if whether it is in the course or furtherance of businesses, the import of service will still be considered as a supply of services. And the next situation is where supply made without consideration, but it is contained in Schedule 1 of CGST Act. So we have discussed also in the previous answer that the activity which is mentioned under Schedule 1, and if it is made without consideration, then also that will be treated as supply under GST. So we don't have to look at the consideration part or the consideration aspect in relation to the activity which is mentioned under Schedule 1 of CGST Act. The next question is related to the imports of goods. The question is, Section 7 also deals with the imports of services. Why there is no reference of import of goods under Section 7? So imports of goods is separately covered under the Custom Act, and wherein the IGST will be levied as additional duty of custom in addition to the basic duty of custom. So under the Custom Act, in addition to the basic custom duty, there will be levied the IGST as additional duty of custom. So because it is separately covered under the Custom Act, there is no need to again mention or refer it in the Section 7. The next question is related to the branch transfer or stock transfer, and the question is, are self supplies such as branch transfer or stock transfer is taxable under GST? So the answer is yes, it is taxable under IGST Act. So the interstate self supplies such as stock transfer, branch transfer or consignment sale shall be taxable under GST as IGST even if it is made without consideration. So the interstate supplies, self supplies such as stock transfer, branch transfer or consignment sale shall be taxable under IGST Act even if it is made without consideration. So suppose you have the two branches in the different state and you are supplying the goods without any consideration, whether it is taxable under GST? So yes, it is taxable under IGST Act even if it is without any consideration. And why it is taxable? The question is why? Because I am just sending the goods to my another branch, so why it should be taxable? According to you or the other businessman, it should not be taxable because you are not selling or supplying the goods or services to other person. So why it is taxable? The question is, under GST you have to register under GST in every single state in which you deal in. So you have to take the registration in the every single state in which you deal in. So suppose you have the two branches in different state, so you have to register under GST as a separate person, and in the GST if you have the two registration, then it will be treated as a distinct person. So the GST will treat you as a two distinct person, and if you supplies the goods such as branch transfer, stock transfer, it will be treated as a supply to the other ordinary person, and therefore it is taxable under the GST. So the answer lies under the GST registration because you are dealing in the two different state, and under GST you have to take the registration in every single states in which you deal in, and you will be treated as a distinct person. Therefore the supplies made to the other branches will be taxable under IGST Act. But if you make the supply within the state or intrastate, then that will be not taxable, because in this case you have just taken the one registration and it will be treated as the supplies to the same person. So therefore it will not be taxable if you just transfer your goods or services within the state. But there is also one concept related to the business vertical, in which if you are dealing in a one state and you want to register as a two person, then also you have to pay tax under GST, because now you are registered as a two different person and it will be treated as a supply to the two other person. Now coming back to the question whether the supplies, self supplies such as stock transfer, is taxable under GST, the answer is yes. If it is made outside the state, then it will be taxable, because the supply will be treated as a supply to the distinct person and it will be treated as a supply to a different person, and it will be taxable under IGST Act. But if you transfer the stock outside, within the state, then it will not be taxable under the GST, subject to the business vertical in which you register as a two distinct person within the state. So in that case also you have to pay the tax. But if you don't register as a business vertical within the state, then you don't need to pay tax. So the nutshell is, if you are dealing in different state and you are selling or transferring the goods, then it is taxable under IGST Act. But if you are dealing or selling or consignment sale within the state, then no GST. But the question is how to determine that whether the supply is a intrastate or interstate, or supplies within the state or outside the state. So I have covered in detail about how to determine that the supply is within or outside the state in the video which is known as the place of supply of goods or services within India. Go check out the video if you want to know more about it. And the next question is related to the transfer of title and possession. And the question is whether transfer of title and possession is necessary for a transaction to constitute supply of goods. So to constitute a supply of goods, you have to transfer both the title and possession. So before we can say that the transfer or the activity is a supply of goods, we have to transfer both the title and the possession to constitute it goods. But in a situation where the title is not transferred but the possession is transferred, then in this case this will be treated as a supply of services under Schedule 2 Clause 1 Clause B as the transfer of right to use. So it will be treated as a supply of services under Schedule 1 Clause 1 and Clause B. So suppose in a situation where the title is not transferred but the goods is in the possession of the recipient, so it will be treated as the right to use the goods and it will be treated as a supply of services under Schedule 2. And in a situation where the possession is transferred immediately but the title is not transferred, like in a situation on sale on approval basis or on the hire purchase. So in those situations where the transfer of title is not made but the transfer of possession is done immediately, then in those cases that will be treated as the supply of goods, like in the case of a hire purchase and in case of sale on approval basis. But if you want to know more about what activity is written under Schedule 2, then you have to check out my other video related to the meaning of supply of services under GST. Go check out the video if you want to know more about it. For falling any activity into the definition of supply, it should be for the consideration and in the course of business. But the question is, what exactly is the meaning of course of business, or what is the meaning of business? So the next question is related to the business, and the question is, what do you mean by supply made in the course or furtherance of business? So what exactly is the meaning of course or furtherance of business? So section 2 subsection 17 gives the definition of business. So if we understand the meaning of businesses, then we will definitely give the idea that what exactly is the meaning of supply in the course or furtherance of businesses. So if any activity is in the course or furtherance of business, it will be treated as a supply. And the answer to the question, what exactly is the meaning of course or furtherance of businesses, then the answer is given under section 2 subsection 17, and it says the business include any trade, commerce, profession, manufacture or vocation, and any activity incidental or ancillary to the above. So if you're doing any trade, commerce, manufacture, profession or vocation, and the activity incidental or ancillary, or in the simple term, the activity related to the above will be treated as that you are doing the business, and it will be treated as in the course or furtherance of business. And the next question is related to the practical aspect of supply in the course or furtherance of business. So the practical question is, an individual buy a car for personal use and after a year sell it to the car dealer. Will the transaction be the supply under the GST? So the answer is no, because in order to constitute a transaction a supply under GST, it should be in the course or furtherance of business. So when a person use the car personally and then sell it to the car dealer, then it is not in the course or furtherance of business. So he is using the car for his personal use. He is not using it for the trade, commerce, manufacture or for the vocation. So in the simple term, when a person use the car or any other goods for the personal purpose, then it will be not be taxable when he sell out those goods, because it was not used for the purpose or in the course of furtherance of business. And the next question is also very practical, and most of the people will find that it is for them. So the question is, a dealer of air conditioner permanently transfer an air condition from his stock in trade for personal use at his residence. Will the transaction constitute a supply? So it is a very popular and very common example. So suppose you have the business and you want to transfer or you want to use that product which you manufacture or trade to use it into your residence. So whether it will be treated as supply under GST or you have to pay tax under this situation. So the meaning of supply was that for constituting any activity to fall into the meaning of supply, it should be for consideration and in the course of business. So in this case, where suppose a person who deal in the air condition want to transfer the air condition into his personal home after using it for the business. So you are using an air condition into the business and then you want to transfer it for your personal residence. So whether it involve any consideration? No, it definitely not involve any consideration. So it means that it should not be constituted as supply under GST, because the definition of supply is that it should be for the consideration, and here in our example there is no consideration involved in case you transfer the used product into his resident or for the personal use. But remember the schedule 1 of the CGST Act. The schedule 1 of CGST Act lists out those activity which will be treated as supply of goods or services even if it is made without consideration. So the answer to the question that when you use or when you transfer the used product for your personal use, then it will be treated as a supply of goods under GST. So schedule 1 serial number 1 talks about this situation. It says that permanent transfer or disposal of business assets where the input tax credit has been availed on such assets shall constitute a supply under GST even if no consideration is involved. So suppose you are using your business assets into your business and you have also taken the input tax credit on it, and then you want to permanently transfer that assets for your personal use, then even if no consideration is involved in the transaction, that transaction will be constituted as supply of goods under GST. and that activity is returned under Schedule 1 of CGST Act. Now the question is, what exactly is the input tax credit and how to utilize it, and what also the other activity which is returned under Schedule 1. So I have covered in detail about the input tax credit and the activity in Schedule 1 in my other videos. Check out the video if you want to know more about it. And the next question is related to the type of supplies. And the question is, what are the different type of supplies under GST law? So there are 4 type of supplies under GST law. The first one is taxable and exempted supplies. The taxable supplies are those in which the GST will be applicable, and the exempted supplies are those which the center or the state government notifies that those activity will not be a supply of goods or services if it will be in the public interest. And the next one is interstate and intrastate supplies. The interstate supplies is those supplies when you make the supply outside the state in which you deal in, and the intrastate supplies are those supplies when you make the supplies within the state. And the next one is composite and mixed supplies, and the fourth one is zero rated supplies. Zero rated supplies are those supplies in which there is no tax leviable. That is a supply. When you take out the definition of supply, it will be treated as a supply, but the government has treated it as a zero rated. We will cover what exactly is a zero rated supply and what is the practical implication of the zero rated supply later in the video, and what is a composite and mixed supplies. So I have given the Q&A on this topic in the previous Q&A series, so check out the video if you want to know more about it. The next question is related to the interstate or intrastate supply of goods or service. So the question is, what are the interstate supplies and intrastate supplies? So the answer of this question is given in IGST Act, not in the CGST Act or the SGST Act, but in the IGST Act. And the section that deal with the interstate or intrastate supply of goods or service is section 7 and section 8. So you have to take a look at the section 7 and 8 before you can say that the supply is intrastate or interstate. But how to determine the place of supply of goods or services is itself a big task. But to give you an idea that what exactly is the interstate or intrastate supply of goods or service, I am giving you just a brief. That if the location of the supplier and the place of supply are in the same state, then it will be treated or termed as a intrastate supply. So if the location and the place of supply is in the same state, then it will be treated as an intrastate supply of goods or services. But if the location of the supplier and the place of supply is in the different state, then it will be treated as the interstate supply of goods or service. So if there is a intrastate supply of goods or services, then the CGST and SGST will be levied, and if the location and if the supply is interstate or outside the state, then IGST will be levied. But for more detail, you have to check out my other videos relating to the how to determine the place of supply of goods or services. So check out the other video if you want to know more about it. The next question is related to a very confusing topic, and which is about the work contract. So the question is whether work contracts and the catering services will be treated as a supply of goods or services under GST. So the work contract has always been the point of confusion for the people. Whether it is a supply of goods or services, what is the chargeability or the taxability of work contract, and how to value the work contract. There are a lot of questions which you might be thinking right now, because it is a very confusing topic. But here I will just give you the answer of the question, that whether the work contract will be treated as a supply of goods or supply of service. So the answer is given under Schedule 2. So the serial number 6A and the 6B of Schedule 2 gives the answer to the question that whether work contract and the catering service is a supply of service or the supply of goods. So it says that the work contract and the catering service is the supply of service. So the work contract is a supply of service. It's not the supply of goods under GST. But if you want to know that how to value the work contract, or if you want to know that what exactly is the taxability of the work contract, then you have to check out my other video which is related to the meaning of supply of service under GST. Check out the video if you want to know more about it. And the next question is very simple one, and it is just for whether the activity is supply of goods or the supply of service. So the question is whether supply of software and the supply of hire purchase will be treated as a supply of goods or supply of service. So Schedule 2 especially covers the answer to this question. Schedule 2, serial number 5, clause 2, clause D. Serial number 5, clause 2, clause D of Schedule 2 talks about the supply of software. It says that the development, modification, enhancement, customization of the information technology software is especially covered under the supply of service. So the supply of software will be treated as the supply of service, not the supply of goods. And about the hire purchase, in which the title of goods will be transferred at the future date, but the possession of the goods is immediately. So in this case, this will be treated as a supply of goods, not a supply of service. And the other question which is also related to this is whether transfer of right to use goods will be treated as a supply of goods or the supply of service. So suppose you want to transfer the right to use goods, not the title or the position of goods. You want to transfer the right to use goods. So in this case, the Schedule 2 especially covers this situation. It says that the right to use goods will be especially treated as a supply of service under GST. The next question is related to those supplies which is outside the scope of supply under GST. So the question is, are there any activities which are treated as neither a supply of goods or supply of service under GST? So the answer is yes. Those activities are written under Schedule 3 of the CGST Act. So it says that those activity which is listed out in Schedule 3 will not be treated as a supply of goods or supply of service, even if it satisfies the definition of supply. So if you perform those activities, then you will not be treated as a supply of goods or services, and you don't need to pay the tax on such activities. So what are those activities? So here's the list of those activities. First one is a supply by an employee to the employer, which is in the course or in relation to the employment. So if the employee perform his employment service to the employer in the course or in relation to the employment, then this will not be treated as a supply of service. So the employee don't need to pay the GST to the department. The second one is the sale of land. So if you sell any land, then it will not be treated as a supply of goods or either supply of service, because it is an immovable property, and the definition of goods exclude the immovable property from its scope. So therefore the sale of land is not taxable under GST. And sale of services of funeral, burial or mortuary, or the services of Kriya Karam. So suppose a Pandit who do the Kriya Karam or the mortuary, funeral or burial activity, it will not be treated as a supply of service. So it is a good news for those Pandit who do the funeral activity. So the funeral, burial or the mortuary service which is performed by any Pandit or other person will not be also treated as a supply of service. And the service by any court or tribunal will also not be covered under the scope of supply. And the last one is functions performed by MLA, MP or local bodies. So how can the MP, MLA tax their activity? So therefore they exclude their activity from the scope of supplies under GST, and the services performed by MP, MLA or the local bodies is especially out of the scope of supply. Alright guys, so this is our last question, and with this our video will end. This is basically the two questions here which is related to the export or imports of goods or service. So the first question is, what is mean by the zero rated supply under GST? So the zero rated supply means the exports of goods or services. So when you export the goods or services, it will be a zero rated supply, and you don't need to pay the tax under GST if you export the goods or services. And the zero rated supply also means the supplies of goods or service to a SEZ unit or the SEZ developer. So if you sell or if you supply the goods or services to the SEZ unit or the SEZ developer which is within the boundary of the India, will also be zero rated under the GST. And the second question is related to the imports. It says, will import of services without consideration be taxable under GST? So we know that for making the supply, you have to satisfy the two conditions. First one is that it should be for the consideration and it should be in the course or furtherance of businesses. But the answer to the question, will import of services without consideration be taxable under GST? So the answer is yes, it is taxable in a situation where you import the services from a related person or from a place of businesses of that person which is outside the India, and whether it is for the consideration or not, but it has to be for the purpose of businesses. So if you import the services from a related person outside India, and if it is the course of businesses, then you don't need to check out that whether there is a consideration involved in that transaction or not, and that activity is especially given under serial number 4 of Schedule 1. Schedule 1 talks about or lists out those activities which will be treated as a supply of goods or services even if it is made without a consideration. So the import of services from a related person outside India, if it is in the course of businesses, then it will be treated as a supply of services even if it is made without consideration. Thanks for watching the video. Make sure that you subscribe my channel and turn on the notification button. The button is just like the ring bell which is given just below the video. The link of all the video which I have referred in this video is given down in the description. Make sure that you comment on the video or share the video to those one who don't know about the GST and who really need the help to understand what exactly is the GST and about its various provision. You can also send me the query by writing an email to sharwangst.148@gmail.com. sharwangst.148@gmail.com. So we will meet in the next video. Till then, bye bye.